Marcia, if you could please start the live stream.
It is loading.
Okay, you'll let us know when it's online.
Yes, 1 second.
Marcia, if you could please start the live stream.
It's loading, Liz. All right, we should be good to go.
All right, sounds good. Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the October 19th meeting of the Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee. I am Senator Clarence Lamb, the Senate Chair of this joint committee, and we're also joined by our House Chair, Delegate Kettleman, as well as members of this committee as well. We appreciate everyone's time and recognize that we do have one audit that we have on today's agenda that we'd like to go over with members of the Office of Legislative Audits. We're also joined by Secretary Fielder, as well as members of the Maryland Higher Education Commission. And MHEC is the only topic on the agenda for today. MHEC, as most people recognize, is really a state agency that helps coordinate the state's post-secondary educational institutions, basically our higher ed, colleges and universities, as well as provides aid to many students in our state too. And it has a budget of several $100 million. And that's why the Office of Legislative Audits also monitors this agency as well. They did have some findings, and so we're going to proceed with Legislative Audits presentation first, followed by MHEC. But before we get there, I want to turn it over to my House co-chair, Delegate Kettleman, for any other opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm good to go. Let's get started.
All right, sounds good. So we'll start with the Office of Legislative Audits, and we'll turn over to Mr. Greg Hook, the Chief Legislative Auditor.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Greg Hook, the Legislative Auditor, and today the Office of Legislative Audits will brief the committee on our June 24th, 2021 Fiscal Compliance Audit Report on the Maryland Higher Education Commission. Accompanying me today in this virtual format are Adam Westover, the Responsible Fiscal Compliance Audit Manager, Brendan Coffey, the Information Systems Audit Manager, and Tu Vong, the Fiscal Compliance Audit Senior. After some introductory comments from me, I will turn it over to those very knowledgeable individuals to walk you through the report's findings. This audit report contains 8 findings, 5 of which were repeated in full or part from the preceding audit. These repeats will be highlighted in the following presentation, which you should have in your possession along with a copy of the audit report and agency responses. Those 8 findings are presented in 4 areas of responsibility or subject matter. Those areas are career-based financial aid, which covers findings 1 and 2, MHEC's automated Maryland College aid processing system, findings 3 and 4, aid and grant funds to community colleges, findings 5 and 6, and information systems security and control, findings 7 and 8. I should add, for the benefit of certain committee members, that finding 7 relates to safeguards over personally identifiable information, which is a repeat audit finding. Although the slide in your presentation handout for that finding is very brief, that should not be taken as a measure of the significance of the issue. Since this report has 5 repeat findings, it is subject to the provisions of State Government Article 21224. The law specifically provides that within 9 months of the most recent audit report, any unit that has 5 or more repeat audit findings shall report to the Office of Legislative Audits for each finding in that report, the corrective actions taken or a schedule for when specific corrective actions will be implemented. Further, MHEC will be required to report to the Office of Legislative Audits on a quarterly basis after the initial report until the actions reported by the agency indicate that satisfactory progress has been made to address all findings. And with that, I will put you in Adam, Brendan, and Tu's very capable hands. Adam, would you like to start?
Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to address the committee about our recent fiscal compliance audit of MHEC. As Greg said, my name is Adam Westover. I was the audit manager for the fiscal compliance portion of the audit. As indicated on slide 2, the audit period covered November 5th, 2015 to March 20th, 2020. MHEC administers several aid programs to post-secondary educational institutions and provides financial assistance to students. The key findings in the report are on slide 3 of the presentation. I will be discussing these findings in more detail. The first finding of the report related to career-based financial aid and is discussed on slide 4. MHEC did not monitor student service obligation compliance in a timely and comprehensive manner, and consequently did not ensure that service obligations were being fulfilled or that repayment of financial aid was pursued when required. This is a repeat finding from the previous audit report. MHEC awards certain career-based financial aid that requires the student to fulfill a service obligation. For example, recipients of the Graduate Nursing Faculty Scholarship are required to work as a full-time nurse faculty member, hospital educator, or in an approved educational role for 1 year for each academic year the award was received. Recipients who do not fulfill their service obligation must repay the award unless the award is forgiven by MHEC. Our review of MHEC's monitoring during calendar year 2019 noted MHEC did not timely generate all available service obligation monitoring reports. For example, for 3 months in 2019, MHEC did not generate for review 6 of the 8 reports that show award recipients and employers needing some sort of follow-up action. MHEC did not send recipients required service obligation requests timely or follow-up timely when recipients did not respond to notices. We noted delays of 10 to 29 days in sending the initial service obligation requests to 4 of the 17 recipients reviewed, and delays of 74 to 208 days in sending subsequent notices to 5 of 17. MHEC's policies say the initial notices should be no more than 14 days after a recipient is placed in a pending status. A recipient is placed in pending status when they are no longer enrolled as a student and must start to fulfill their service obligation. Subsequent annual notices should be issued 1 year after receiving the recipient's prior response. Follow-up notices for 12 of the 17 recipients who did not respond to the initial service obligation request were issued between 14 to 442 days late. The failure to generate the monitoring reports and send timely notices is significant because collection efforts are not initiated by MHEC's accounting department until all required requests have been sent and no responses have been received. Similar conditions regarding the failure to send required requests timely were commented upon in our 3 preceding audit reports going back to 2010. Finding 2 of the report is on slide 5. The second finding also relates to career-based financial aid. Adjustments made to recipients' accounts were not subject to independent review and approval, and MHEC did not ensure that repayments due from recipients who did not meet their service obligation were posted to its accounts receivable system. MHEC processed 1,600 adjustments totaling $5.1 million in its accounts receivable system during our audit period. However, MHEC did not have a process to ensure adjustments to the system supporting documentation were reviewed and approved by independent supervisory personnel. MHEC had no documentation that during our audit period it reconciled total amount due from students on its financial aid system to its separate accounts receivable system as required by its policy. The financial aid system is the source for manual postings of amounts owed to the accounts receivable system used for collection activity. As a result, there's a lack of assurance that all amounts due have been recorded in the accounts receivable system and pursued for collection. Finding 3 of the report on slide 6 related to the Maryland College Aid Processing System, referred to as MDCAPs. This is also a repeat finding from a previous audit. MHEC uses MDCAPs to store personal, academic, and financial information for individuals applying for financial aid to attend Maryland colleges. MDCAPs includes the service obligation loan repayment module referred to as SOLAR. SOLAR is used to monitor awards requiring fulfillment of a service obligation. Sufficient controls were not established over the issuance and monitoring of user access to MDCAPs. As of September 1st, 2020, there were 1,350 active user accounts, of which 1,305 user accounts were external entities. MHEC did not have a policy requiring requests from external users, such as users at Maryland colleges, for the assignment or modification of system access to be approved by authorized personnel at the external entity. MHEC could not provide a user agreement form for 8 of the 25 external and internal user accounts we reviewed. MHEC did not use available output reports to review user access granted to MHEC employees. Rather, MHEC used a manually maintained spreadsheet to perform periodic access reviews. Furthermore, the reviews were not independent because the employee conducting them was also the employee responsible for establishing, modifying, and disabling user accounts. MHEC did not require external entities to periodically review system access granted to their employees to ensure access was still appropriate. As of September 2020, there were 650 active external users that had not logged into MDCAPs for at least 6 months. On slide 7 is the fourth finding of the report, which is also related to MDCAPs. This was a repeat finding from our previous audit. MHEC did not adequately restrict access to the SOLAR module of MDCAPs. 8 users were assigned capabilities to process adjustments in SOLAR, and they did not need the access to perform their job duties. 7 additional users could process adjustments without independent supervisor review and approval. These employees could unilaterally forgive or defer a recipient's service obligation or record a recipient's service obligation as being fulfilled. MHEC did not use available output reports of adjustments processed in SOLAR to verify the propriety of these adjustments. During fiscal year 2019, MHEC made 627 adjustments in SOLAR to designate a recipient's service obligation status as fulfilled, paid in full, forgiven, or deferred. These 627 recipients have been awarded financial aid totaling $5.2 million. On slide 8 is the fifth finding of the report on aid to community colleges. This is a repeat finding from the prior audit. MHEC had not implemented effective procedures for ensuring the propriety of payments made to community colleges for retirement and pension contributions. The state, through MHEC, funds certain costs for community college employees in the Maryland State Teachers Retirement and Pension System and in an optional private retirement plan. These contributions total $60.8 million in fiscal year 2019. Overlay audit reports have identified issues with MHEC's process for ensuring the propriety of these costs dating back to 2001. Beginning with fiscal year 2015, MHEC required the community colleges' independent auditors to provide certain assurances regarding costs incurred, and MHEC instituted a reconciliation of the auditor reported information to MHEC records. MHEC discontinued this reconciliation in January 2018 when the employee responsible for performing it resigned. We found that the audited data for fiscal 2019 disclosed differences that MHEC had not investigated and resolved. For example, that year's audited data indicated that the colleges received $14.2 million from MHEC for employees in optional retirement plans, but MHEC records indicated payments of $16.3 million, a difference of $2.1 million. On slide 9 is the final 3 findings of the report. I will discuss finding 6. Finding 6 is MHEC did not ensure community colleges returned unspent English for speakers of other languages grant funds. Our review of program data reported by 11 colleges disclosed 4 colleges that appeared to have been paid $403,000 in excess of program costs, but only one of the 4 remitted its excess balance of about $5,000. I will now turn it over to Brendan Coffey, the Information Systems Audit Manager, and he will briefly discuss findings 7 and 8.
Hello, co-chairs Senator Lamb and Senator Delegate Krim. My name is Brendan Coffey. I was the network audit manager for the IT findings for the MHEC audit. Both of my findings are presented here on slide 7, page 7. I'm sorry, page 9. Finding 7 is a repeat finding, and it was related to personally identifiable information that could have been stored better. In addition, the data, we noted that the data was also stored in the development systems that were located at the vendor's headquarters, and MHEC had failed to do any kind of audit over that system security to make sure it was properly secured, or review any kind of reports of an audit over that development system security. Finding 8 is in regard to a security control known as a web application firewall that was not in use to secure the MDCAP system. A web application firewall is different from a normal firewall in that it reviews the communications traffic at a deeper level, looking for specific known types of attacks that a normal firewall would allow through. So industry best practices is to have such a firewall in place. That's all I was going to say about these. I will turn it back to Adam Westover.
Thanks, Brendan. The last slide of our presentation is slide 9. It has some concluding remarks on procedures MHEC should implement. Thanks again for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee at this time.
I would like to just jump in and just acknowledge the fact that that MHEC's response to the audit report was positive, and that they generally agreed with all of our findings and recommendations in the report. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hook, and the rest of the members of the audit team. Again, great work, and we appreciate all of your effort to perform this audit. I think now we would like to call before the committee members of MHEC, and we can start with Secretary Fielder, who's joined us as well. I think you have a team there with you in the room that you're welcome to introduce, and then to briefly provide your presentation in regards to the audit as well. And then we'll turn it over to the members for questions. Secretary Fielder.
I'm hearing background. I'm Jim Fielder, Secretary of Maryland Higher Education Commission. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the recently concluded fiscal compliance audit by the Office of Legislative Audits. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Greg Hook, including Audit Manager Mr. Adam Westover and his team. Congratulate them on the thoroughness and professionalism demonstrated while conducting this audit, especially working as they had to partially remotely due to the pandemic, because we got started physically in the same building and then we ended up moving to the remote. Also joining me today is Mr. Jeff Newman, is Assistant Secretary for Finance and Administration, Mr. Audrey Bashum, Director of Budget and Finance, who joined us in 2018, Ms. Paris Jackson, Chief Information Officer, and Ms. Donna Thomas, Director of Office of Student Financial Assistance, all of which have been directly involved in reviewing the audit findings and moving aggressively forward. I'd like to begin by reconfirming our commitment and the commitment of my team to address and resolving these audit findings. As noted in our response to the audit, MHEC has agreed to each of the recommendations provided by LLA. In addition, we have developed an implementation plan including aggressive and projected completion dates. The plan includes meeting with the Department of Budget and Management Audit and Compliance Unit monthly to help facilitate the recommended changes, which we began before the audit was even completed. Our most recent meeting was just last Friday, October 15th. I'm happy to report that we have completed implementation of recommendations 5 and 6 and are aggressively working to implement the remaining ones with the schedule already fixed. We have provided responses to each of the specific findings which are included in the audit report and have corrective action plans in place. We can address the status of any additional questions that you have at this time.
Senator?
Thank you, Secretary Fielder. I know you have other members of MHEC there as well. Is there anything else that you would like to present or that members there would like to present?
No, we're prepared to walk through each of the findings if you'd like, or answer questions. The audits are extremely important to us as we look for them for basically an operational roadmap of what needs to be corrected. And it's always good to have a set of eyes on it to look for things that have not been aggressively approached as could have been.
Okay. Well, thank you, Secretary Fielder and your team there. I know we have some members that do have questions. I took some names down earlier when some of the hands came up, and I think the first hands that I saw were Delegate Kettleman, Delegate Arntz, Delegate Valentino Smith, and then I also see Senator Hester has her hand up too. If any of the other members of the committee would like to ask questions, feel free to use the raise hand function, and we'll try to call them in the order that we see them. Maybe we can start with Delegate Kettleman.
Thank you. And thank you, Jim, and all for being here and being willing to answer the questions. We didn't go over the document that you provided, the auditors provided, that sort of tell us what parts of the findings have been completed. And I assume that that is what you were referring to earlier when you said if they have 5 or more repeat findings, that there's follow-up. But my basic underlying question is, and this is to MHEC, I guess I don't really understand why there would be repeat findings. And that comes from reading answers that are the same or similar in most audits. Say we are going to do A, B, and C, and we will fix it. And then it doesn't get fixed. And I just wondered if there were reasons that you might share with us as to why the findings that are repeated didn't get fixed the first time.
Thank you. That's a very good and a very direct question, which I do appreciate both. Repeat findings indicate, for me, sometimes when there's a lack of management oversight to get things adjusted the way they should. You can talk about any audit in terms of turnover, in terms of not having the IT platform that's necessary when you look at improvements. To all these things that are happening, those are excuses. They aren't necessarily solutions. That what we're putting in place are solutions to make sure that we aggressively follow a set of corrective actions, working with DBM, audit and compliance, to make sure that it doesn't get repeated.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if no further questions, gentlemen, we'll go to Delegate Arntz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just maybe a quick question for the committee. Do we have any processes in place to help these divisions monitor the findings once we first hit them with it? Leading a little bit back from Delegate Kettleman's question, how do we track these things when we find something like the last time on the English speaking or whatever, we gave you had a problem? What are we doing internally to ensure that this doesn't repeat itself? Are there any, I don't know, procedures or whatever?
Maybe that's a question for Mr. Hook, or
probably Mr. Hook, or maybe it's even for you, Senator. Is there something we should be doing to sit back and say, when we give them and we find these findings and we confront them with it, how do we monitor that? Maybe Greg, if you don't mind.
Delegate, it's a good question, and it's one I think we've been pondering for a while as well. You know, the audit cycle is 3 to 4 years, and honestly, I don't have the resources to monitor every agency over that period of time. But the secretary mentioned DBM, the Audit Compliance Unit, and I think I have mentioned it as well several times in past JAC hearings. I believe it's their responsibility, or they've assumed the responsibility, to monitor other executive department agencies when they have a poor audit report or they have repeat findings. And I also think, and I could be corrected by the committee staff, I think the November hearing is going to have a presentation by DBM about the work of that unit. So some of these questions might be something we could pose to DBM in November, during the JAC hearing in November, to ask, you know, what are they doing? I think it's going to be, that hearing is probably more about SSA, Social Services Administration monitoring, but certainly it could be, the question could be expanded to a number of audits, including MHEC, which had 5 repeats. You know, what is being done to make sure? I just don't have the resources to do that throughout the period between audits for all 185, well, it wouldn't be that many, but all the state agencies.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. I think let's go to the next part of my questions was, and I'm just picking out two of the findings because they deal with dollars. One of the things I think since I've been on this committee, which has been a while, and I really appreciate being on it, that is we don't seem to have, and I brought this up before, we don't seem to have a vehicle for accountability. At least we're not seeing that in these hearings, and we're not seeing what's happening. When we look at findings 5 and 6, let's say, we're dealing with millions of dollars there, millions of dollars that are repeat findings. And something has to dwell on people that we're dealing with taxpayers' dollars here. We're spending their money like it's not theirs. We're spending it like we have it. Yet doesn't seem to be any vehicle out here to sit back and say, okay, Mr. Boss of the group who's allowed this $403,000, let's talk about the benefits and what have you, retirement fund, that $2 million differentiation. We don't seem to have anybody talking about where those dollars are now. How do we get them back, and who's accountable for that? And what are we doing to prevent it from happening again? And I don't know who answers that or who can address that. That's a statement more than it is a question.
Well, I will take a stab at that, Delegate Ahrens. I would say that our budget committees have hearings during session for every state agency. And we are provided audits, and our budget analysts review the audits before they come in and make their presentations to our subcommittees. So I think our budget committees should be tasked and are tasked with that responsibility to do a follow-up questioning of the agencies when they have findings from audits, and also more importantly, repeat findings. So that is my response to you. And I would say that if you personally are concerned, and I know you are, I would get in touch with the budget committees, and if for this one, the education committee subcommittee, and say you're going to have an audit report that's going to show repeat findings, and could you question the secretary on what they have done to correct those findings? And I think that is the time to do that. And that, I think that's part of our process in the legislature. So I see the Vice Chair of Appropriations, Vice Chair Chang is on the line, and I think you would agree with that.
I guess my question then would lead to, why isn't this happening now? Why are we allowing this to continue? These are big dollars. I mean, we've done this in most every audit hearing I've been on. We're dealing with millions and millions of dollars that when I leave this meeting, I don't feel like we've done anything other than say, you know what, this department has lost or can't find millions of dollars. And I don't hear about the next page. Maybe there's something you're suggesting we go to the committees and say, we need to present to us, because that's where the dollars, that's where the accountability lies, according to what you said.
Well, I will tell you this also, part of our process as the chairs of the audit committee, we do follow-up letters to the agencies, and we do require them to respond. And I believe Mr. Hook provides us with those reports. So like after this, we'll if Mr. Hook feels as if we need to do that, we will send a letter to the secretary at MHEC and ask for specific responses. Did you want to add anything here, Mr. Hook?
Well, I think you're describing the JCR process, and I know Senator Frye Hester is probably waiting to jump in on this, because I think she even proposed language last year about PII or IT security using JCR language. So there is a mechanism for establishing some type of accountability that has a financial penalty. So, you know, I think the legislature may be somewhat limited, but you control the purse strings. And Delegate Ahrens, I understand your concern. I've been at every hearing where you've expressed your frustration about who's held accountable, who's paying the price for it. And I sit there at the table every time and just shake my head because I don't know the answer. But
But you know what you just said, the accountability of financial to the department. When you penalize the department, you're actually penalizing the people that benefit from what's the department's supposed to be doing.
Right.
That isn't necessarily the penalty we need to tell you, okay, we're just not going to give you enough money to do the job you should be doing. And I don't think that's the answer to the problem. The problem has to come down to where if I have a job to do, I'm a state delegate, I have a job to do, and I don't do my job should be in jeopardy. And I don't see that. I don't see that side of it. And as a taxpayer, but not a taxpayer and a delegate, I'm frustrated with the fact that we just cavalierly say that, oh, well, it's going to be so-and-so's responsibility. And I don't see that action happening. You know, I've been in these, I'll get off this because it's not just about MHEC I'm talking about. It's about most every audit we've been on. So, but I appreciate the answers. I just want you to know it's still a concern of mine, and I'll keep harping on it. And I hope we can do something. If I can be a part of the solution, I would gladly support any legislation to do that. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, could I add something here while we're on this topic?
Sure.
So, Delegate, as you may recall, our last hearing was with Department of Human Services and SSA. And it was very disturbing, some of the information we received. And the most disturbing part to me was that there were newborn babies at the hospital that were not assessed after being born to parents or to a mother that had had their parental rights removed. That assessment did not occur before that child left the hospital. And also being born to parents that were addicted. So there was immediate follow-up from me and Chairman Lamb, and also working with the auditors. And we have discussed this, and we have communicated with them. We have communicated with the administration. And yesterday I had a very long meeting with the secretary. And she told me that as a result of our hearing and the follow-up conversations we have had, that they've hired an internal auditor to come in and make sure that these things are complied with. She has a compliance unit now. She's setting up a hotline that I think was as a result of legislation we did, but also she's getting that moving, a hotline, so that people can report child abuse. And we've talked about different things that we can do to help her get these assessments completed. So now I would tell you that, no, we don't do that on every audit, but to me, that was a very disturbing audit that needed immediate attention because of vulnerable children. Now, if you wish, Delegate Ahrens, we could maybe discuss setting up some kind of subcommittee here, perhaps, that would do that kind of follow-up for all the audits. But on that audit, I knew we needed immediate action. And Senator Lamb and myself have been working very hard with the auditors and with the agency to address these immediate issues that I thought that we should do. So I hope that gives you some hope that we just don't let things go and nothing happens. We're trying. So I'm willing to discuss that with you further, Delegate Ahrens.
Yeah, and just to echo what Chairman Kern was saying too, I share your concerns, Delegate Ahrens. I think it's incumbent on this committee and agencies themselves to make sure that they follow up on these findings, as well as DVM to stay on top of these too. We have a part to play, and if you have further ideas on how we can help address that as a committee, I'm certainly open to them as well. I think next for questions, we have Delegate Valentino Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just also echo Delegate Ahrens's concerns. And your, Mr. Chairman's suggestion that we as a committee try and revisit what our goal is and what our statutory authority is and what more we may be able to do. So at this point, I'm thinking that maybe I should wait and ask my questions after the good Senator Frye Hester, because I have a feeling I was going to delve into the PII findings. And I know that that's a little bit more of the area of expertise that she has with the committees that she's doing in the Senate, and have her, Senator Frye, was that what you were going to, Hester? Okay. If you don't mind, I would let her go first. And then if she doesn't hit what I thought I was going to hit, I'll circle back around. Okay.
Yeah, that works. Senator Hester?
There's a lot of questions. I'm sure I'll leave you some, Delegate, but thank you so much. That was very kind. As Mr. Hook pointed out, I've been looking at this issue for a few years now as chair of the Joint Committee on Cyber, IT, and Biotechnology. And for the past 2 years, for any agency or school district that has had repeat cybersecurity findings, including PII, I've asked the appropriate budget liaison to put in budget language that restricts $100,000 worth of that agency's budget until they meet with our state chief security information officer and rectify those findings. So to the point that we don't want to restrict their money, we only want to restrict their money until that they've talked to the appropriate people to start working on those things. I did check in briefly with our state CISO this morning, who said that MHAC is being very cooperative with these findings currently, and that they have completed the survey that the Joint Committee is looking at over the interim. So I want to thank MHAC for that. But in my role, I'm trying to understand why we have these repeat findings. And so if you look at finding 3 around too many users approved for access, and finding 7 around the MHAC network, and finding 8 around the PII, all of these are repeat findings. And so, yes, we need to be accountable, but my question is more fundamental than that. Why do we have repeat findings? Is it the turnover because we're not paying our IT folks enough? Is it a lack of technical expertise within MHAC on cybersecurity issues? Are you following, and have you been following, the state cybersecurity manual, which requires this? And when did you start working with Do It? Was it just after this audit report, or was it 4 years ago? If MHAC could comment on those 4 questions, specifically with regard to the cybersecurity repeat findings in number 3, 7, and 8, I would greatly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Paris Jackson, Chief IT.
Yeah, number 3 first.
Oh, okay.
Number 3.
You want to do
Good
that?
afternoon, everyone. I'm Donna Thomas, Director for the Office of Student Financial Assistance. I wanted to first address finding 3, which was sufficient controls within MDCAPs. So at the creation of MDCAPs was created to allow financial aid officers to create their own user accounts. That was the design of the system at that particular time. And so it allowed the financial aid officers the ability to set up accounts with the expectation that when their staff left, they were supposed to close those accounts. And so what we identified is that that action was not taking place. And so what we are doing now is we are working with our MDCAPs vendor to put in controls in the system that would automatically deactivate an account if it has gone unused for a certain period of time. And so that will definitely address finding 3. And it's coming up as a repeat finding because at the time that this was identified in the first audit review, the controls were not put in place in order to address this particular finding. And then we also internally had a lot of turnover within the office with regards to doing the internal compliance of checking and reviewing records to make sure that they were being closed out internally, which I know is not a complete excuse, but taking that into consideration where we're already a small agency and we can only have certain people do certain controls, that did also create delay on our end to fully implement the corrective actions. But I do want to inform the committee that we are definitely making great strides, and we are on track to addressing this to where the MDCAP system will be set up, that if a financial aid officer or external user does not log into their account within a certain amount of time, the account will automatically be deactivated. We have already updated the system to no longer allow our external users the capability to create accounts. So that automatically has eliminated institutions from having that ability to create other accounts. So now everything is streamlined through our office to where we now can verify users, make modifications to the accounts and so forth to better ensure the safety of the system and the pertinent information that's contained. I'll turn it over to Paris to address the other.
And before we jump off that, Donna, also Interclips is new.
Correct.
Since this first, yeah.
Since the
we changed
prior audit.
contractor, yes.
Since the prior audit, we changed vendors. So under this current audit, we have a new vendor who is going to be working with us to put this into place.
And very much more responsive.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Paris Jackson. I'm the Director of IT here, and I was going to make just that point. Again, not an excuse, not necessarily a solution, but the original audit was under our old vendor. They were being responsive, and we've been working with Do It the whole time. I will say part of it was just resources, and I think along with legislatively every year with in our system, there's so many modifications that are necessary, and encryption has always been a part of it. Fast forward to we're working with a new vendor now, and as the secretary just indicated, they are much more responsive. And I will also say that this, how should I put it? This database level encryption, and I will say moving from one vendor to the next, the original vendor, they also did host some of our servers. And when we moved to our new vendor, they were hosting servers as well. We have taken care of that. All of our servers are being hosted and secured by Do It at this time. So that is no longer a concern. We have made great strides working with Do It and Interclips, our new vendor. And I think probably by the end of the year, we're hopefully will have resolved both findings 7 and 8.
Senator Hester, you have a follow-up? You're muted.
Sorry about that. That was helpful explanation. And it seems like a lot of this has to do with your original choice of vendor and moving to the better vendor. Who is responsible for following the state cybersecurity manual within MHEC? And then who is responsible for picking the vendor and validating that vendor is doing a good job?
That would be me, and sort of a shared responsibility between myself and the Director of Financial Aid.
And do you think it would be helpful at all as other agencies pick their vendors if they have any kind of support from Do It, or is it better made as an agency alone decision?
We've had support from Do It. We've been working with Do It the whole time. Yes,
we work with Do It through the RFP process.
Thank you very much. So those were all my cybersecurity questions. I do have another one, but I'll turn it back over to you, Chair, and wait for my turn for the next one.
Okay. Delegate Valentina Smith.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Hester. So I just want to dwell just a little bit more. One is then, I think this gets back to some of Delegate Arndt's concerns. The vendor was not doing what they were supposed to do, or the vendor was failing. Then did somebody go back and get contract penalties or get, financial remuneration? Do we have penalties and damages in when a vendor is not doing what they're supposed to do? That's one question. And then the second question is, from a security perspective then, and I think Senator Hester was alluding to this guide that the state has, are we requiring across the board for all the state agencies to have the same protections in place? And are we requiring encryption for data that's at rest and data that's in transit? Or do we have a standard that you're requiring for what will be maintained encrypted for both a privacy perspective and a security perspective?
Is that question for me?
For whoever can respond.
Whoever's got the ability to answer.
Well, the standard will be database level encryption for the MDCAP system, if that's what you're asking.
Are you saying at a database? What about when it's in transit?
Well, we haven't so much addressed that. I'll raise that with the vendor.
I mean, that would have to do with student and parent privacy information in transit, right?
Right, that is correct.
So
yeah, this addresses data at rest.
does the state manual requiring encryption for all of the stuff that's in transit with state agencies and privacy information? Senator Hester probably knows the answer to that one.
No, I don't. I was going to suggest that the security manual is like 500 pages long. I would just follow up with Mr. Shepard and ask him that question specifically.
So we can probably do some of that offline, I guess. Then the second question is, then for the vendors, for your prior vendor, if they were in violation or not doing what they're supposed to do, did you seek damages from them?
We did not.
Can I ask why?
Jeff, can you respond?
I believe at the time, it wasn't that they were not providing what we're talking about now, because it was, can you elaborate a little more, Don?
Sure. So the way it works with our MDCAP system, and Harris is speaking a little to this, in the past, when we have new legislative programs that are enacted, they become priority as far as what the vendor can implement in the system. And so prior to, what year is this? This is 2021. I believe prior to 2020, we had a number of new programs that were acted through legislation. And so the priority at that time with our vendor was to implement those programs within the MDCAP system. And so this goes towards their response time, where their attention was on implementing those programs first before addressing other issues such as data encryption and so forth. So putting in perspective, new programs in order for students to be able to apply and receive the grants that was prioritized over the necessary data encryption and so forth.
So I guess what you're saying is that whatever contract it was, you weren't having the vendors have encryption and privacy and security as a condition of their contract?
It's not so much as a condition, it was communicated to them. We wanted those necessary steps to be taken with regards to data encryption and for that to be done in the system. But the priority was to implement those new legislative programs. To give you an example, when programs are passed through legislation, it took the vendor up to 9, sometimes 12 months to implement that program in the system. We had occasions where there were multiple programs that were passed through legislation that had to be implemented within less than a year. And so that required the vendor to focus their attention on implementing those programs, and other things were kind of second tier to that. So it did come based on the prioritization of the need at that time.
Thank you. Chair Lamb and Chair Cram, I just think that, you know, this is what we've seen from other agencies too about, you know, audit findings with respect to PII, audit findings, you know, with respect to other problems with vendors, is whether or not at this point we decide whether these agencies even have the right contracts with vendors in place and whether they've got the right provisions for damages and penalties in place. And that's probably an across the board policy that we need to look at as legislators, because we're just seeing this over and over again. So thank you.
So could I add something here, Mr. Chairman? So can I ask the agency then, would you have the authority to put a clause in your contract that allows for damages in the event that the contract provisions are not met? That's my question.
We've done it.
Not at this time. That's a question that we would have to talk to our principal counsel about with review of the current contract that we have to see if that's something that we can do as an agency or if it's something outside the agency's purview.
Okay, so I didn't quite understand that. So you're saying that you do not have the authority to put a provision in your contract?
What I'm saying is that I'm not certain if we have that authority or not as an agency. I can check with our principal counsel to see if the agency has that authority to do so.
So is that a procurement issue?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, yes. Okay,
Yes,
yeah.
it's, and most of the contracts, if I can address it for just a second, the contracts are finished and signed and that cannot be amended without both parties agreeing in writing.
Yes. Well, I'm not really asking about the current contract. I'm talking about a contract that you would enter into today, like a new contract. Do
Right.
you have that authority to put a provision in the contract that would address this issue?
We'll have to address that through procurement and through.
Okay. Okay, that's all. That's all.
Yeah, and I see Mr. Hook's hand raised. I think just to follow up on what Senator Krim was saying too, I do share the similar concerns here that there need to be adequate protections in place, or we need to enable the agencies or the various departments to be able to do this because if there were a privacy breach, the cost to the state or to the agency or to whoever would be enormous in terms of credit monitoring and other follow-up and cleanup that would need to be done for any violations of privacy that would occur. And so, I think this is not, small peanuts to look at the need for provisions in these types of contracts and procurements to make sure that there are adequate protections in place, because the state could end up paying through the nose later on if there are breaches of some sort. Mr. Hook, and then I think Mr. Tannen also wanted to add something to the OLA team.
He's probably gonna add the same thing I am. The first thing, the question about encryption for data in transit, Brendan Coffey must have the answer for that. So if Brendan wants to come on when I'm done and talk about that, he can, because I know that's a Bible to us, that DUIT security manual. Regarding liquidated damages, I know anecdotally, we've had findings about that in other agencies where we have seen contractors violate state contracts and the state has taken no action to try to recover costs for poor contractor performance. And I don't know if part of the problem is the agency is partially responsible for the failure, for example, by not monitoring the contractor or giving the contractor bad advice. I don't know. I also don't know if it's just a question of they just don't feel like they want to bother with taking the contractor to court or opening that can of worms. But I know we have had findings, and I know we've had this discussion in the Joint Audit Committee in the past, Joint Audit and Evaluation Committee, about liquidated damages and about many times agencies' resistance to go after poor performing contractors. Brian, is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I wanted to say, we have done some follow-up studies, and generally speaking, the language is already there. So it's not something that they need to even look at. The existing contract, standard contract language, provides for liquidated damages in the event that the vendor defaults. It's standard contract language, and I can't say I'm intimately familiar with the MHEC contract that we're talking about now, but I would be willing to wager a bet that if you looked at that contract, there is a provision there for damages should the vendor default on their responsibilities. But I concur with Greg that we do routinely find that despite the language, agencies, generally speaking, are not availing themselves of that benefit. And it really does also go back to the Delegate Aaron's question before about holding people accountable. In this case, it would be a vendor.
I should add for the record, Brian Tannen is the director of our fiscal and compliance audit, our compliance and performance audit division, just for the record.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Valentina Smith, any other questions or? Is that it for you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can follow up and also work with Senator Hester. Thank you.
Okay. So I think next I see Delegate Harrison and Senator Reedy, and then we'll come back for second bites of the apple with Delegate Kettleman and maybe Senator Hester if she wants to follow up. Delegate Harrison.
Yes, thank you. So just very quickly on that same thing, we have in the short time that I've been on this committee, we have seen multiple times where there have been repeat findings in these audits. And if it is a matter of the procurement or the agencies not following up, then perhaps we as a joint committee need to make a recommendation on some action against the agencies for being fiscally irresponsible in not following up and ensuring that, you know, for lack of a better term, that we're getting our money's worth for the work that, the money that we're paying for the work that is supposed to be done. I'm not sure quite how that is. I would, you know, look to my more senior members of the General Assembly, but I think that, you know, we have to stop talking about things and start taking action and making people responsible for their action or lack of action. Thank you.
Thank you. And certainly if you have thoughts on that, we as the chair and the chairs and the other members too are open to, you know, thoughts and ideas on this too. I think we're all trying to achieve the same goal and purpose here, which is trying to improve accountability and make sure that money is spent wisely. So thank you for that. Senator Reedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I apologize that my internet kept cutting out, so I kept coming out and coming back in. I don't know if this has been addressed yet, and this is not specific to the audit findings. So I just wanted to ask MHEC, if this might be an offline conversation, but I'm aware of some issues with 4 community colleges that were raised funds that they were expected to be matched because of 2019 legislation that we passed on workforce readiness grant programs. And the money was not there at this time for it to be matched. So I wanted to see if maybe offline someone could communicate with me about that. One of them is my home, my community college in my district. So I just wanted to put that out there and see if you could be in communication with me on that.
Yes, we'll follow up directly. Jeff?
Want me to say something now?
Go ahead.
So the legislation that was passed allowed for money to be put into the budget. It didn't mandate money to be put in the budget. It was a discretionary item, and money was not put into the budget, state budget, for this fiscal year.
Okay, so that's something we should work on maybe together offline. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Reedy. Back to Delegate Kettleman.
Thank you very much. My phone keeps ringing. I'm trying to stop it. I have one comment and then a question. Just to reiterate what Greg said, when I first came into the Ehrlich administration, paratransit was running. I'm sorry. And it was running about 70% on time. There was a provision in the contracts to have liquidated damages. The agency actually had attempted and had collected liquidated damages from Yellow Transit at one point, but the administration, and this was prior to our coming in, but had told them to give them back. So it is a very difficult thing, whether it's the agency or the administration, the rest others that don't want it to happen. I also suggest that we would want to be looking at these contracts, because my recollection is that state contracts sort of go overboard in protecting the state and may make it too difficult for, it's driving me nuts, making it too difficult for any vendor to actually meet the demands and the provisions of the contract, which may also be part of why they don't impose liquidated damages. The question I had is part of question and suggestion. I know that MHEC had one of the findings that they responded to included I have no idea how to make my computer stop doing that. I've got it. My apologies. That it was partly something that the colleges had to do in order for you to meet the deadlines. And we didn't discuss that, but maybe we ought to encourage the agencies not to make excuses, but when there are things that depend on others, particularly, for example, the IT issues and issues that depend on other parts of the government, ought to be put into the response to the audit, so that would give us a better idea as to why things don't get done. So that would be my suggestion, unless there's a reason not to.
Any response from either the agency or OA? I see, Mr. Coffey, you have your hand up. I don't know if that's in response to this question or not.
No, it's in response to the question of Delegate Valentino Smith and Senator Hester. Should I address it now or wait?
Why don't you wait and just stand by for a little bit, because I know Senator Hester has some additional follow-up questions too.
Understand.
Delegate Kettleman, I'm trying to understand. So what would you suggest be the action we should take?
I'm not sure I'm suggesting an action by your office so much as the responses. I know that agencies, we agree, we're going to do A, B, C, and D, but, and don't feel like necessarily giving excuses. But if there are, I think the one we looked at last time, because they were trying to get an entire new internet website technology.
To replace Chessie system. They're replacing Chessie.
Exactly. So those things, and also the turnover and the other things that the agency has spoken about, put that into their response so that it gives us a better idea, not, that if we don't agree with those as being excuses, then we can deal with it, but it would let us know a little bit better as to exactly why the things aren't getting done.
Yeah, I think actually it's a good idea, but I from personal knowledge, I think they might be resistant to do that. And because I don't think they want to publicly admit that, for example, they're short personnel. Because
why
there
on
may
earth
be,
not?
Excuse me?
Why on earth not?
Because there may be some higher ups telling them that they can't have any more. I'll give you an example, and I'll name the agency. Years ago, I think I was a director in our office. This is probably 10 years ago, maybe more. And we were doing an audit of the Department of Environment. And we had some findings where they were not doing monitoring of certain provisions that the annotated code or COMAR said they should do. And I can't think what it was. It may have been, sediment control or oil something or other. And we had a meeting to talk about these issues. And I thought they made an admission to us. And they said, we would love nothing more than to be able to do this. But every year there are more and more regulations. There's more and more laws. There's more on our plate. We're not getting any more people. And we've been told we can't have any more people. What are we supposed to do? And I think they were incredibly frustrated at the time. And I think there was some validity to their point.
There is.
But I don't know if they would ever put that in a public response to an audit report.
In a corporation, perhaps that kind of issue would be inappropriate, but we're spending taxpayer money. And it seems to me that what that agency said is exactly what I have thought and seen for years, is that we do keep passing more and more laws. And I think the illustration that this agency gave about all of the programs that we passed last year that had to be put into place before they could go back to doing the things they're supposed to do anyway. It really does put the agencies in a very, very difficult position. And I think as taxpayers, we ought to know what the situation is. Either get more people or stop passing so many laws. So that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Kettleman. We have Senator Hester.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sorry, the sun keeps getting in my face. My question was similar to what I asked MHEC, but this time I wanted to ask the Office of OLA. I mean, it seems like a lot of our findings for every agency is on these cybersecurity and PII issues. And so my first question was, what percent of our repeat audit findings fall into this area? And then the second question is what I asked MHEC is, why do we have these issues? Is it lack of resources, lack of people, lack of technical expertise? Because fundamentally, it seems like every single agency is struggling with cybersecurity, and it's not their core mission. And so it seems like there's a process for improvement here. And I'd just like to hear the auditor's response to that.
Well, Senator, my name is Brendan Coffey. I was the network manager for the MHEC audit. I can't really speak for the percentage of repeats that are IT findings. I think my director, Steve Jersey, could answer that. I do know that what MHEC mentioned in this meeting about what caused their repeats being involved with the contractors changing. I think I would back up what they stated in regards to their situation. They had a lot of changes that needed to get done, and that new contractor kind of came in the middle of it, so as far as MHEC goes, that's what's happening there. But Steve, can you speak to the percentage of repeats across the board?
Hi, Senator Steve Jersey from OLA, and I can't give a percentage right off the top here, but in the area of the PII and the safeguarding of the information, unfortunately, over the last 2, 3, 4 years, out of all of our office-wide repeat findings, the PII findings, they are remaining steady, if not steady, but increasing. So it's unfortunate. There's a variety of reasons for it. There's not always easy answers in this area. I know you've been working diligently with this on this matter with Do It, with the state CISO, but perhaps it's just time for greater effort and attention at the Do It level to bring more tools and attention and guidance to the agencies. At the individual agency level, it's remediation's not making progress.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to invite any members of this committee who want to tune into our next Joint Committee on Cyber, IT, and Biotech. We'll have a presentation from the state CISO on the survey results from all the agencies that he's gathered over the summer, and would love to have you all tune into that as well, because I think it might have to be a joint effort to fix this issue. Thank you.
If I may address the earlier question, Chair Senator Lamb, the IT security requirements do require encryption of PII at rest and in transit. Those are requirements in place in that ITSM, the IT security manual that Senator Frye Hester mentioned earlier.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I see Delegate Arndt has his hand up again. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick thing on what Delegate Kettleman mentioned. When we do these bills that add different chores, a bill, let's say we're adding something to a secretary's responsibilities, is there a way we could possibly look at some legislation? Because we keep hearing we can do this with I can't think of the phrase, with what we have already. We have the staff available to do it, so it's not going to impose any additional work on the current staff. It seems to me that a lot of these things it's not just the vendors that we're dealing with, it's also the lack of staffing and how we get people. And to suggest some things, it might be if we could sit down and have some accountability on the end that when you say we can do this without adding additional staff, there has to be some accountability, because a lot of this stuff is, we've heard this in past audits, people aren't trained enough. We don't have people, we can't get to the people that need it. We can't do this, we can't do that. The only two choices we have is to hold them accountable for what the absolute budget requirements are, or we sit back and say, you know what, maybe we really need to downsize our offering as a department. Suggesting MHEC not take the responsibility, or we not offer that product with taxpayer dollars until we can actually handle it as a legislative body. I mean, those types of things are some things we should be considering to go back with, because I can't tell you a time we've been on here that we haven't heard the fact is we don't have the staff, we don't have this, we don't have that. So if we limit our offering until we can get the staff and actually do the job we're actually putting this legislation in for, we're going to continue to have these problems. And if we can't train the people, we shouldn't be doing the service until we can train the people and get an effective result. That's a statement again, I guess. Isn't that so?
So, yes.
I'm done, thanks.
Any other questions? I think I wanted to kind of weave together a few thoughts and have a question or two as well to MHEC and the agency. From what was presented earlier in the audit, I know we've been focused on very much so on the IT components and privacy and data security here, but what the audit found goes beyond that in its scope as well. And I wonder, given the exchange that Delegate Kettleman and Mr. Hook and most recently Delegate Arntz had, if there's really a personnel issue here that goes beyond just the IT component, but if we were to weave a common thread as to why we had so many repeat findings in this instance, and some of the deficiencies that have been identified as part of the audit, is having adequate personnel an issue here that has led to so many of these findings as part of this audit. And this is, I guess, directed to MHEC. And obviously, as Mr. Hook mentioned, this is a little bit of a challenging question for any agency, of course, but to the extent that you feel comfortable, how much of what we're seeing here is that, a fixed number of people have been asked to do too much, and that there's simply not enough resources within the agency to be able to stay up on top of, what are repeat findings from years ago, or even requirements that should not be new when it comes to data security and integrity that still keep coming up.
Okay, Senator, let me address that by talking a little bit about the previous MDCAPs vendor. The MDCAPs 10-year-old contract had a certain amount of set hours that would be required of the vendor to doing ongoing maintenance and enhancements. We're now at 26 different scholarship programs. Each time a new piece of legislation comes through, it's not just what you do, you have the people, you have to spend the money, the enhancement money, to fix the program. And all those programs are interactive. And so you get in a situation, which is important, which is urgent. When legislation comes through, it's an emergency legislation, there's no options. So you reprioritize what you have. So that causes its own internal stresses. As you know, last year, the piece of legislation passed with the expectation that MHEC will hire 10 new people to handle the HBCU expected increases in academic program requests. Yet it's not going to be funded until the date that the programs can be submitted. So you're already looking up of how you're going to have someone start on a given date and do the job that they're expected to do without recruitment training and having them ready to go. So there's all kinds of these things that are moving parts. At the same time, I can say that 8 years ago, now it's probably more like 12 years ago, under previous administration, there were 90 some staff members in MHEC. We're now at 65. And during that period of time, even though we've added as much technology and interactive, even receiving electronic payments in order to reduce a lot of that, you still have what's important and what's urgent and how do you prioritize what gets done. So in terms of, you know, does that, if you ask any chief financial officer, what do you need? I need more people. I need more resources. And that's across the board anywhere. And, you know, I think when I look at impact and what we are in position to do and get accomplished, the staff has done just a tremendous job, especially during a pandemic when we all had to be remote. I'm not sure that that answers as directly as you would like, but that's the answer.
Well, I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. That is a very good indirect response to a question. And I think, you know, the way that I interpret that is that, you know, you can only ask people to do so much before things fall off the wagon. And it sounds as though, given some of the numbers that you even just presented, that the agency has been asked to do more with even less people. And at some point that there becomes a breaking point at that and where things do fall off. And so, you know, I think my concern is that some of the repeat findings and some of the challenges that have not been addressed are a result of that, of inadequate staffing. And I know that there's been, you know, pointing to the vendor and, you know, ensuring that they are responsive to the agency. You know, I think it still stems back to staffing, where if you have adequate staffing to be able to stay on top of a vendor, whether it's in the procurement of the agreement with them as to their scope of work and what they're supposed to be doing, or in following up to making sure that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, the vendor ultimately is responsible to the agency, to all of you. And then the agency is responsible to all of us. And so, you know, I think you can cite the vendor for certain deficiencies, but at the end of the day, it's the agency that has to stay on top of the vendor to make sure that those deficiencies are addressed. And I am concerned that, you know, based on your answer, you know, my interpretation is that there just isn't the adequate staff to stay on top of a lot of the concerns that have been brought forward, simply because you've been asked to do more with less.
Can I ask a question here?
Yeah, go ahead, Chairman Crum.
Mr. Secretary, how many positions are vacant now within your agency?
13, 2 of which are frozen, the remainder are under recruitment now with anticipated filling the 11 of them by December. Different stages of recruitment.
And is that average for you to have that many positions vacant?
Yes, when I started, the number was even higher than that. It was 20 what?
21.
21 when I started. And we recruit from university staff. And what happens is we have some individuals coming in with a master's working on a doctorate, and it creates a natural career pathway for them to return to a university or an institution once they've been here for a few years. And so it really is a resource allocation of where can we put the best people and get everything done. I mean, during this administration, you know, we've gained a pen or two, and at the same time, we expect 10 more in the next fiscal year. So we haven't lost. But the level of work, even when we compensate with as much technologies as we've been able to implement, it's stressful. Yes.
So when people leave the agency, I assume you do an exit interview. Do they talk about the amount of work is the reason or one of the reasons they're leaving?
Well, one of the reasons is if a staff member here has a family and goes to a university, the university will pay for the tuition of the children. So compensation is in fact, a real item for, in higher education. And the expectation with the complexities that we deal with, we have to have some very sophisticated, and we do within MHEC, individuals that are doing these different things.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I see Delegate Valentino Smith has a question.
Yeah, so last question to Valentina Smith.
Last one, just, sorry, it's not going to be a question. It's just a comment as we're all commenting on what we're seeing and hearing over time is I see Ms. Gruber on too from Department of Legislative Services. And each time we pass legislation, we kind of look to that fiscal note and maybe, as a policy group here at Joint Audits, we need to work with them to re-coordinate the perspective on and look, I've been guilty of asking for stuff over my 11 years there of agencies to do in statutory. So do we need to maybe start to look to them too, to be saying, look, are we asking now them to do something that they've already had and continue to have bad audit findings on and aren't doing well and see that triggered up? And is this going to change the contracts that they need to do with the vendors because they're going to need to do extra stuff? So just another comment on the way that we're all doing a lot of work here and how we want to make sure, Delegate Arndt said, it just doesn't end here because we hear about the findings, but collectively, maybe we start to use the fiscal note writers too, to be kind of alerting us a little bit more to when we're adding to statutes and statutory requirements. Just an idea.
And yeah, Delegate Valentino Smith, I agree with you. And our fiscal notes, they always do point out when more staff is needed. It doesn't mean more staff will be given to the agency. So, and a lot of things are going to change over the next 18 months, including the ability of the General Assembly to add money to the budget. So if you are going to be adding a responsibility to an agency, maybe that comes with pins in the budget, for that activity. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's we always note how many pins will be needed, but quite often they don't come.
Yeah, no, I know. And maybe, too, reminding us that they've had bad audit findings in that area. And now you're asking them to do more.
You're right. Absolutely.
Your writers are terrific, just kind of suggesting that we all need to kind of use this information more than just here. Thank you.
Great.
All right. So I think we've wrapped up questions for this hearing. And in closing, I was giving some of what Delegate Arndt's comments some additional thought. And I know that during the interim, I think the committee does write a summary of its work to the presiding officers and also to the Legislative Policy Committee. And, this may be something for Chairman Krim and I to discuss, but whether we can include some more specific concerns that we think that the budget committee should follow up on, some additional instructions or guidance based on hearings that we've had in the interim between with this Joint Audits and Evaluation Committee to provide some more specific guidance that the budget committees can look at when they are in their budget decision-making cycle. And so that may be something that we can also look at as another venue or tool to ensure that there's some better follow-up and accountability of some of the findings that have come forward. This is obviously, a concern, and we'll try to stay on top of this as well. I think MHEC is an important agency, and any dollar that isn't properly used is another dollar that would not necessarily go to a student that's in need or has earned a scholarship and such. And so we appreciate the efforts of the Office of Legislative Audits for staying on top of this and for bringing these findings to our attention. Chairman Krim, anything that you would like to add?
Well, I wanted to check with Mr. Hook. Mr. Hook, are you good, or do you need some time?
Could I just take an opportunity? And as you said before, I'm not going to say brief opportunity because I'm never brief, as you've reminded me several times. And I know Senator Lamb has to get off in 3 minutes. But could I just make a statement? I prepared a statement about COVID and its impact on auditing. And could I just make a statement for the record?
Sure.
Thank you. To conclude the discussion on MHEC, I would like an opportunity to elaborate on the impact of the COVID emergency pandemic on the audit that was mentioned by Secretary Fielder. The fiscal compliance audit fieldwork was suspended on April 2020, based on a request from MHEC related to its staff's inability to access records and timely respond to audit requests resulting from the pandemic. Naturally, OLA was also impacted by the pandemic, but OLA immediately initiated measures, often adapted in days, not weeks, to develop and implement full-time remote auditing techniques and processes, which I am proud to say did not diminish the quality of the audit. In other words, OLA went to 100% telework almost overnight. We also reimagined our internal intranet and developed the main employee engagement page, which allowed staff to remain connected with their coworkers while in a secure electronic environment. I, like you, have heard anecdotally that state agencies may have ceased or reduced auditing efforts, and certainly some customer services suffered and may still be operating under limited service delivery models. I cannot speak for other state agencies, but I believe that the committee can take pride in the productivity of OLA since March 2020. With the advent of the emergency designation in March and the immediate implementation of remote auditing, OLA instituted an internal weekly reporting and monitoring process to measure each employee's productivity to ensure that we individually and collectively remained efficient and effective. This monitoring was matched with scheduling steps and other actions to ensure that OLA's over 100 employees remain productive and focused on auditing. This enabled us to respond to the MHEC deferral request and several others like it by temporarily reassigning staff to work on other jobs until restarting the MHEC audit in June 2020. To sum up, OLA has been continuously auditing since March 2020, and I firmly believe that during the state of emergency, OLA has been one of the most consistently productive state agencies in overall employee workload and output. The state of emergency and externally imposed limitations on the availability of auditee personnel and records may have slowed the audit process some, but I cannot praise the OLA staff enough for their collective efforts and work product. Frankly, government bureaucracy is often painted with a broad brush as being slow and cumbersome when it comes to change, and certainly we auditors by nature are deliberative creatures, but I'm amazed by the adaptability and performance of OLA staff and honored to be the head of such a group of professionals. Thank you.
Now, I would just add, Greg and his team, they don't give themselves enough credit. They have not ever missed a beat for a moment, helping you all fulfill your constitutional oversight role. So they do deserve much credit.
And I would also add that chairs the LLA, when I was Secretary of Labor and came in and there were tens of millions of dollars worth of audit problems, if it hadn't been for them and their support to help establish a roadmap of what needed to be addressed, we wouldn't have gotten that department corrected. So they're a tremendous team to work with. I can really brag on our team in terms of immediately switching to telework and Donna's team handling how many 500 teleconferences a week. You think about that, out of 13 people handling that kind of and keeping everything moving. It's been an extraordinary year and a half. But I'm hopeful we'll all have wonderful memories at some point of it.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Secretary Fielder. And thank you, Mr. Hook, to you and your team for working through some very challenging times, and you have the gratitude of the full committee as well as the entire General Assembly on this. Chairman Crum, anything else to add?
Yes, I just want to add my compliments too. I know Vicki, I don't know what your official title is, Executive Director Gruber.
Yes.
Is also responsible for the, I guess, efficient operation of Department of Legislative Services, and Mr. Hook, of course, of our legislative auditors. And I can tell you that through the remote working, I was in touch with Mr. Hook many times, and he was always working. And I know that his staff was always working and they were doing a great job. So as we could tell by the number of emails we get and the work output that we see. So very good. And I did want to thank MHEC Secretary Fielder for being here today. And you heard a lot of an internal discussion today that we normally do not have the time for. We did have the time today, and it was very productive. I enjoyed the discussion, and I hope that we have follow-up, and I stand ready to get your emails of suggestions. And I see Senator Kagan. Would you like to say something, Senator?
Oh, that's very sweet. Thank you, Delegate Graham. I just thought that I'd mention that my colleague and committee mate, the chair of this committee, Senator Lamb, and his wife Sarah have become parents, first-time parents.
They have.
Committee meeting, and I just thought we might want to offer them congratulations.
And restful
Thank you.
nights, restful nights. We all wish you that. So, thank you all for being here today. We had an extraordinary attendance today, and that, of course, supports the work of the committee and, of course, of our auditors. So those were my comments, Senator.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Senator Kagan, for those kind remarks. I think that wraps up the meeting for this afternoon. I know we have another meeting, I think, coming up next month, so stay tuned to your emails from committee staff, and we'll let you know when that's taking place as well. So if there's nothing else to add, thank you all for attending. We really appreciate your participation in this important hearing, and we'll reconvene shortly next month.